I've hidden this truth for years because no one would believe me. Not my friends, not my family. But the evidence has been sitting in plain sight the whole time. If I tell you, you'll never see me the same way again. I was 11 when it happened, the day Troy handed me a birthday party invite. And not just any invite. Troy was that kid. The one everyone wanted to be friends with. Meanwhile, I was the anxious loner in the back row. The one who broke out in a cold sweat if the teacher even said my name. I remember him smirking and saying, "My mom's making me invite you. She feels bad, no one else does." I laughed like it didn't sting. But inside, yeah, that hurt. Still, I hadn't been to a birthday since 2nd grade. So I forced a smile and said I'd be there. He mentioned pizza and video games, but what he didn't say. His older brother Jacob would be there too. And Jacob was infamous for terrorizing uncool kids. That night, I stood in front of the mirror trying on every shirt I owned, which wasn't many. Practiced my smile. Practiced conversations. Even Googled how to be cool at parties. My mom was over the moon. She ran to the store, bought a gift card, and wrapped it in paper that screamed, "Friendly, but not trying too hard." I even rehearsed my laugh so it didn't sound desperate or fake. The next day, Troy's mom opened the door with this big, warm smile. "You must be Ben. We're so glad you came." She turned to Troy and, loud enough for everyone to hear, said, "Make sure you include him in everything, okay?" The other kids gave me that look, like they'd just been assigned group work they didn't sign up for. Xbox teams were picked. Troy just happened to put me on his. And every time I got a kill in Call of Duty, he'd yell, "Nice one, Ben," like I just invented a cure for something. The kids clapped, but I caught one rolling his eyes. Even in the pool, after my surprisingly decent cannonball, I overheard Jacob whisper to another kid, "Remember, we have to be nice." Then, during Capture the Flag, something changed. They let me plan the strategy, probably expecting me to fail. But I'd been studying playground tactics for years. My plan worked. We crushed them. Troy's high five after that felt different. When he opened my gift, a coding games book I'd overheard him mention wanting, his polite thanks turned into a genuine, "Wait, this is awesome. How did you know?" By cake time, people were actually talking to me like a real human. But then, I saw him, Jacob, standing in the upstairs window, staring straight at me. Troy noticed too and quickly squirted me with a water gun, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the window. 10 minutes later, Jacob was back. This time with Troy's mom behind him, saying something that made him scowl. We were in the living room playing Mario Kart when Jacob walked in. The room went silent. His eyes locked on me. He pulled up his shirt just enough to show the BB gun tucked underneath. Then he pulled a few pellets from his pocket and rolled them in his palm. Before I could even react, "Jacob, now." Troy's mom's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. She stormed in, grabbed his ear. Yes, actually grabbed it, and dragged him outside. Through the glass, we watched her absolutely tear into him. He went from smug to stunned to humiliated in seconds. When she marched him back in, her hand still on his shoulder, she said, "He's sorry for what he was about to do. He won't be bothering you boys again." Jacob muttered an apology and stomped upstairs. The whole room lit back up, laughter flooding in again. That's when Troy leaned over and grinned. My mom set that up. She knew he was bullying kids and wanted to catch him. After that, the party was perfect. We played. We laughed. I forgot this invite wasn't even genuine. By the end, I'd exchanged gamer tags with 3 kids, and Troy had already mentioned hanging out next weekend. I left feeling like the universe had shifted. But when Monday rolled around, Troy wasn't at school. The other kids were. And the first thing I heard was, "Dude, did you hear about Troy?" When I was 9, I learned the hard way that some injuries are better left alone. Because my dad didn't believe in healing. He believed in finishing them. It started with a scraped knee from falling off my skateboard. Normal, right? Except my dad sat me on the kitchen table, pulled out a scalpel and cut deeper. He told me shallow wounds were unfinished injuries, that the body remembered them, and would keep recreating the same accident until you completed it. Apparently, years as an EMT had taught him this truth. Yeah. Or maybe it was just the first step into full-blown obsession. Mom had already left by then. Took my sister with her. Me? I got stuck in his warped little science experiment. He kept journals, pages filled with hand-drawn diagrams of wounds, their optimal depth, and mathematical calculations for permanent healing. After he carved my knee that first time, he wrapped it with surgical precision and proudly told me I'd never scrape that exact spot again. And when I didn't, it just cemented his belief. From then on, every paper cut, every bruise, every stubbed toe had to be completed. Paper cut? He'd slice until he hit muscle. Bruised shin? He'd bruise the entire leg. He'd put on gloves, scrubs, even a surgical mask, and narrate the process like some twisted TED Talk. His clinic lived in the bathroom. Scalpels, hammers, needles, all perfectly organized in a sterile metal cabinet. And he had formulas. A half-inch cut needed to be deepened to 1 inch. A bruise had to cover the entire muscle group. He'd mark me with a surgical pen before starting. Like a real doctor, while I screamed. I learned fast. Hide everything. But hiding meant risk because he did daily inspections. I had to strip down, spin slowly while he scanned for fresh injuries. If he caught me hiding something, the completion would be twice as bad. Once, a teacher noticed me limping from a completed ankle injury and called home. Dad spun a story about a rare genetic disorder that caused spontaneous wounds. He forged documents, got a shady doctor friend to back him up, and the school believed it. They even gave me special accommodations for days I could barely walk. The worst day came when I got a concussion playing basketball. I didn't tell him. For 2 days, I powered through the dizziness, the nausea, terrified of what a completed head injury might mean. But during inspection, he noticed my pupils. And he snapped. He screamed that an unfinished concussion meant I'd get them for the rest of my life. He showed me pages from his journal, diagrams of brains, his research on traumatic brain injuries, and then pulled out a football helmet. The plan? Put me against the wall and hit my head with a baseball bat to finish the job. I begged. He just said, 1 properly completed concussion now, or dozens of incomplete ones forever. He even practiced his swing. That's when I ran. Locked myself in my bedroom. He spent hours pounding on the door, ranting about optimal force and flipping through his journals. For 3 days, I lived on bathroom sink water while he camped outside. He slid diagrams of incomplete trauma patterns under the door, played audio clips of doctors talking about concussion syndrome. On the 3rd night, I overheard him making a call, asking about sedation options for uncooperative patients. The next morning, he picked my lock while I was sleeping. I woke to him looming over me, syringe in hand, bat leaning against the wall. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "Dr. Walker's on his way. He agrees we should do this under controlled conditions." I bolted straight out my window over the fence to the neighbor's house. Dad followed, calm as ever, telling them I had a dangerous incomplete head injury that had to be finished. He flashed his fake medical credentials. Then a van pulled up, Dr. Walker, carrying what looked like legit hospital gear. The neighbors started wavering. Dad talked about completion therapy like it was real medicine. Dr. Walker stepped toward me with another syringe, Dad gripping the bat. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," he said. "But that concussion is getting completed today." They backed me into a corner. Dad raised the bat over his head and said the words I'll never forget. "I've calculated exactly where to hit without killing you." Probably. The neighbors froze. But their 12-year-old daughter? She had her phone out, recording every second from her bedroom window. I twisted hard, breaking free from Dr. Walker's grip, and bolted toward the street screaming for help. Out of nowhere, a mail truck screeched to a stop right in front of me. The driver, this older guy with military tattoos up his arms, jumped out without hesitation. He planted himself between me and my dad like a human shield, using his truck to block them from getting any closer. His name was Tom, and as he kept one hand on me, the other was already on his phone calling 911. Dad didn't even break a sweat. He started calmly explaining to the neighbors, who were now gathering on their lawns, that I had a dangerous untreated concussion that could kill me without immediate intervention. Dr. Walker started flashing official-looking paperwork around, rattling off medical jargon about chronic injury recurrence syndrome, and I could actually see some neighbors' expressions soften, like maybe they were starting to believe him. 8 minutes later, the police finally showed up. I was clinging to Tom's arm while Dad stood there in full scrubs, looking like the world's most concerned parent. He handed over his forged medical documents, all saying I had this bizarre genetic condition that required his completion therapy. The officers looked uncertain, until Dr. Walker stepped in and backed up every word, even showing his own medical license. That's when I yanked up my shirt, right there in the middle of the lawn. Dozens of scars, perfectly straight, measured, precise, covered my chest and back. You could see the change in the officers' faces. Dad tried to say I'd done them to myself, but then the neighbor's daughter came running over with her phone. The video, him holding the bat over me while Dr. Walker prepared the syringe, left no room for lies. Within minutes, an officer separated me from both of them. An ambulance was called. More police cars pulled up. At the hospital, I was put in a small exam room. Every time a nurse or doctor got near me with any kind of medical tool, my whole body tensed. The nurse, Patricia, moved slow, explaining everything before she touched me. She checked my concussion symptoms, took pictures of every scar. I must have asked her a dozen times if my dad could find me here. She kept promising security knew not to let him anywhere near the pediatric ward. Then Detective Sarah Moore from Child Protective Services came in. She had a camera and started documenting every scar while I explained what the original injury had been before Dad completed it. Turns out there were records, 43 ER visits in 5 years, every single one signed off by Dr. Walker as the attending physician. 3 hours later, Detective Moore told me I'd be going into emergency foster care. Dad had been arrested, but she warned me he'd probably make bail soon. The moment she said it, I panicked. I told her he'd find me. He'd finish the concussion. She promised my location would stay secret, even from my school. My foster parents were an older couple who'd taken in abused kids before. They led me to a small bedroom, showed me the lock on the inside of the door, told me I was the only one who could open it. I must have tested it 100 times before pushing the dresser in front of the door anyway. The next morning, Detective Moore came back, and the news was bad. Dad and Dr. Walker had both posted bail. Dad's lawyer was claiming I'd had a psychotic break from the concussion and that my father was just a concerned parent trying to help his mentally ill son. The school had even turned over all my accommodation records, the ones based on Dad's fake condition, and the defense was twisting them into proof. She also told me she was trying to track down my mom and sister, but Dad had filed papers years ago saying Mom had abandoned us and had no custody rights. I told her the truth. Mom left because Dad started talking about completing injuries on my little sister after she got a splinter. She knew she could only save one of us. That night she begged me to go with her, but I stayed, because I knew if we both vanished, he'd never stop hunting for us. The foster home felt like another planet. Quiet voices, slow movements. Every time a car went past the window, I froze, certain it was Dad coming back for me. They had this old orange cat who wandered over and curled up in my lap while I sat rigid on the couch. When it started purring against my chest, something in me just broke. I couldn't remember the last time anything touched me without hurting. And the foster mom? She didn't make a big scene. She just sat across from me, flipping through a magazine, like crying 9-year-olds were a completely normal part of her day. 2 days later, Detective Moore showed up at the foster home to take me somewhere. We ended up at my old school, sitting in the small, cluttered office of Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor who, last year, had been the only adult to even ask why I was limping. She opened a thick manila folder and slid it across the desk toward Detective Moore. Inside, 3 separate reports she'd filed over the past 2 years about my injuries. Every single time, Dad had shown up with Dr. Walker's forged medical documents, explaining my rare genetic condition, and the school administration had decided everything was fine. Mrs. Rodriguez handed over copies of everything, Even the grainy, secretly taken photos she'd risked her job to capture, showing bruises wrapping around my arms like rings. That same afternoon, Dad's lawyer filed an emergency petition. According to him, my concussion was life-threatening, and staying in foster care was putting me in danger. The hearing was set for the very next morning. Detective Moore stayed at the foster home all night, pacing with her phone glued to her ear, calling every contact she had while I paced my bedroom, counting down the hours, my stomach in knots. When we walked into the courthouse the next morning, my chest locked up. There was Dad, in his best suit, standing with his lawyer and Dr. Walker right by the metal detectors. He looked exactly how a loving, concerned father should look. When our eyes met, he didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just mouthed one word. Incomplete. Couldn't breathe. My knees went weak. The foster parents had to physically block his view of me while Detective Moore shouted for security. During the emergency hearing, Dad's lawyer pulled out medical journals about completion therapy, and even got 3 other parents to testify over the phone about how Dad had helped their kids. Judge Freeman frowned a lot, flipping through the pages, but the concussion claim seemed to be getting to him. In the end, he ordered an independent medical evaluation before making any custody decision. They sent me to Dr. Torres, a child psychiatrist. She spent 3 hours asking questions and taking careful notes about every single scar. Somewhere in the middle, I realized I was explaining Dad's system, in the same tone a teacher uses for a science project. I told her how I knew exactly where the blood vessels were, how to avoid them, and how to calculate wound depth based on muscle density. Her face kept tightening, like each detail was another knife twist. 3 days later, they enrolled me in a new school under a fake name. I kept my head down, but the other kids started noticing things like why I wouldn't play dodgeball or why I freaked out in art class when I got a paper cut. The nurse had to sit me down and talk me through breathing exercises while I held a Band-Aid, my mind automatically running numbers for how deep Dad would have cut to finish it. Then Detective Moore called with something huge. Dr. Walker had lost his medical license in Texas 5 years ago for unauthorized human experimentation. She'd found 3 families who had filed complaints against him, and then vanished out of state. It wasn't enough for family court yet, but it opened a criminal investigation. The foster parents took me to a pediatric specialist. They ran x-rays of my entire body, every bone, every joint. The images showed healed fractures in my ribs and arms that had been deliberately rebroken. The radiologist's voice shook as she called the police from the exam room. A week later, I scraped my elbow on the sidewalk. It was tiny, barely bleeding, and yet, I was instantly back in survival mode. Locking myself in the bathroom, paper towels pressed hard over it, praying no one noticed. The foster mom knocked softly. She didn't demand to see it. She just sat on the floor outside the door, talking about how she knew what it was like to be scared of getting help. After an hour, I finally cracked the door. She knelt, holding the tube of antibiotic ointment where I could see it before she even touched me. She explained every step. Cleaning it, putting on the Band-Aid, and not once did she make the injury worse. When she was done, I started crying. Not from pain, but because I didn't remember the last time someone treated me without hurting me. That night, they made mac and cheese just because I'd mentioned it was my favorite. And for the first time, I moved the dresser away from my bedroom door. I still locked it, but at least now I could open it quickly if I wanted to. The next morning, Detective Moore called. Her voice was urgent. She said she'd found something important about my mom. Half an hour later, she was sitting across from me in the foster parents' living room, a folder clutched in her hands. Inside was my entire missing history. She'd tracked my mom, Karen, all the way to California, living with my little sister. Through old court records, she pieced together something I'd never known. Mom had been fighting for custody for 2 years, and Dad? He'd used his medical connections to crush her in court, having her declared mentally unstable. Detectives slid copies of psychiatric evaluations across the coffee table. All signed by Dr. Walker. All claiming Mom suffered from dangerous delusions, that Dad was hurting me. The reports painted her as paranoid. A woman who had abandoned her children over imaginary abuse. But Detective had called her and Mom was already on a plane to Portland, bringing boxes of her own evidence. 3 days later, Detective drove me to the CPS office. She said someone wanted to meet me. I walked into a conference room and froze. The woman standing there, I barely recognized her. She looked different, older, but her eyes? They were the same as my sister's. She took a step toward me, and I instantly backed into the wall. She stopped, tears streaming down her face, while Detective gently explained I might need time. Mom pulled photos from her bag. Me at 5 years old, no scars, no bruises, grinning on a sunny beach. Then she showed drawings my sister had made of me from memory. Detective set up a video call, and suddenly, my sister's face filled the screen. She broke down crying the second she saw me. She kept saying she was sorry over and over, telling me she remembered the day I taught her to ride a bike. I didn't remember much, but seeing her cry made something deep inside my chest ache in a way I couldn't name. The next day, Dad's lawyer struck back. Emergency paperwork claiming Mom was just chasing money in a custody battle. Documents saying she'd voluntarily abandoned us. Signed statements from 3 psychiatrists declaring she was delusional. But Mom's lawyer was ready. She proved all 3 psychiatrists worked at facilities where Dr. Walker had privileges. She showed the judge phone records of Dr. Walker calling each one the day before they wrote their evaluations. And then, bank records, proving Dad had been paying Dr. Walker $5,000 a month in consultation fees. 2 weeks later, Dr. Amanda Torres finished my evaluation. She took the stand and told the judge I had complex PTSD from years of medical child abuse. She called completion therapy exactly what it was, torture dressed up as medicine. After reviewing Dad's journals, she said his ideas showed clear signs of delusional thinking. The judge ordered me to remain in foster care until the criminal trial was over. That same week, Dad hired a private investigator. The guy started tailing Detective Moore's car until he was caught outside my school, aiming a telephoto lens at the building. The principal called the cops. When they arrested him, he admitted Dad had paid him to find where I was living, so he could monitor my medical condition. That night, Detective Moore moved me to a new foster home. For the first 3 days, I shoved my dresser and bed against the door again. The new house had another foster kid, Marcus, 16, removed from his home 2 years ago. On my 3rd night there, he sat in the hallway outside my barricaded door. He started talking through the wood about his stepdad, the beatings, the fear, the years it took to unlearn the idea that all adults want to hurt you. He told me it took him 6 months before he could sleep without barricading his door. After an hour, I cracked mine open just enough to see him. He was sitting cross-legged in the hallway, calm, patient, and I noticed the old scars running up his arms, scars that looked a lot like mine. 3 days later, I started meeting with a specialist who worked with kids who'd survived medical abuse. Her office wasn't cold and sterile like a hospital. It was warm, but her desk was covered in real medical journals, pages spread open for me to see. And right there, she dismantled my entire childhood in less than an hour. Every single thing Dad had drilled into me about completion therapy. Every formula, every lecture. It was all fiction. She showed me study after study proving the truth. Deepening a wound didn't prevent it from coming back. It didn't complete anything. It just caused more damage, more scars, more pain. She explained how the body heals naturally without any need to finish an injury. And I argued with her, not because I didn't believe the science, but because believing it meant accepting that every moment of agony had been for nothing. 2 weeks later, we were back in court for a supervised visitation hearing. Dad walked in with 3 sets of parents ready to testify for him. They claimed his treatments had cured their kids, that his methods prevented chronic injuries. One mother swore completion therapy had stopped her son's recurring bruises. Detective Moore's eyes narrowed. She recognized their name from Dr. Walker's old complaint files. Under cross-examination, the mother kept glancing at Dad before answering. When the lawyer asked if she'd been paid to testify, her voice cracked. Then she broke. She admitted Dad had offered to pay off their $30,000 medical debt if they supported him. The other 2 families didn't even wait for the recess. They got up and walked out. Then Mom's lawyer went for the jugular. She showed phone records proving Dad had called my grandparents 47 times, threatening to have them arrested if they tried to contact me. She read out emails where Dad bragged about cutting me off from anyone who might help. He'd switched me from public school to homeschooling the moment teachers started asking questions. Told neighbors I had some rare disorder that made me prone to injuries. Built an entire paper trail of fake medical history just to hide the abuse. Around that time, they switched my case to a new detective. And he wasn't more. He kept glancing at his phone during our meetings, forgot details we'd already discussed, and missed connections that Moore would have caught instantly. My foster parents noticed too, and they didn't let it slide. They called the department every day demanding Moore's reinstatement. They weren't alone. Other families she'd helped started flooding the chief's office with letters, emails, phone calls. It worked. 2 weeks later, Moore walked back into my case. Files in hand, eyes sharp, looking more determined than ever. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I wasn't walking into a fight alone. By week 10, Dad's lawyer had filed another motion, this time to get all my therapy records. He claimed they needed to see if I was making things up or if I had mental issues that made me unreliable. My therapist fought hard to protect my privacy, but Judge Freeman ruled that some records had to be shared for fairness. I sat in the waiting room while they argued, knowing Dad was about to read every private thing I'd ever said about the nightmares, the panic attacks, the way his voice still made my stomach twist. That same week, my foster family's German Shepherd started shadowing me. It was like he could sense the anxiety before I even knew it was there, pressing against my legs when my hands shook, curling up beside me when the memories got too loud. I overheard my foster parents one night whispering about maybe making this permanent, if the court would let them. Then Mom's lawyer dropped a bomb. She presented pages straight from Dad's journal, future experiments he'd planned for when I turned 12. The entries spelled it out in chilling detail. Burn completion procedures using controlled heat sources. Calculations about how fast scar tissue would form. Judge Freeman's face went pale as he read the part about using a soldering iron to complete minor burns, and Dad's theory that fire injuries needed to reach 3rd degree to prevent recurrence. The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. And for a moment, nobody moved. Everyone was just sitting there, staring at the proof of what my father had been planning for me. A week later, I met with the court-appointed child advocate. And unlike everyone else, she didn't start by telling me what was going to happen. She actually asked me what I wanted. She gave me crayons, paper, even little dolls, and had me show her what living with my dad was like. And for the first time, someone didn't just nod politely. She listened when I said I never wanted to be alone with him again, not even in a supervised visit. 3 months in, Dr. Walker's trial began. I testified by video link from another room, because just the thought of being in the same building as him made my chest tighten. I told them about the baseball bat, the syringe, how he'd pulled up in his van ready to help Dad complete my concussion. I broke down twice when the prosecutor showed photos of the medical equipment they'd found. Walker's lawyer tried to say I was confused from the head injury, but I remembered everything, the surgical scrubs, the way he adjusted his gloves, the exact words he used about controlled conditions. Meanwhile, Detective Moore, now reinstated and even given a commendation, dug deeper into Dad's activities. She uncovered that he'd been posting on medical forums under fake names, trying to recruit other doctors who believed in completion therapy. In one thread, he called my case a success story and offered to train other parents in his methods, diagrams included. He even shared cutting depth charts based on the child's age. The investigation blew wide open when they found 3 more families Dad had been counseling online. By then, I'd stopped barricading my bedroom door. The locks, and the German Shepherd sleeping outside my room like a furry bodyguard, felt like enough. My foster parents didn't mention it, but I caught them smiling when they noticed the furniture was back where it belonged. Then Dad's parents arrived from Arizona, expensive suits, high-powered lawyers in tow. They called their son a misunderstood genius who needed psychiatric treatment, not prison. They even filed for custody of me, claiming they could give me a stable home and proper medical care while Dad got help. And suddenly, Karen's public defender looked painfully outmatched. But then week 14 hit, and the prosecutor's forensic accountant dropped a bomb. She'd found Dad had been billing insurance for every single completion session, using legitimate diagnostic codes, and getting Dr. Walker to sign off as the attending physician. Over $200,000 in fraudulent claims. That meant federal charges on top of everything else. And just like that, Dad's parents' lawyers weren't quite so confident anymore. The next week, my sister testified from California. She sat in a bright room with palm trees behind her. But her voice was steady as she described what he'd done when she was 6. How he held her down to complete a bruise on her arm while I screamed for him to stop. How he used a hammer on her bicep, calculating each strike so the bruising would spread across the entire muscle. Mom, she said, had just stood frozen in the doorway. Then my sister held up her arm to the camera, showing the scar tissue still there 7 years later. Judge Freeman called a 15-minute recess. Even the court reporter looked like she might be sick. That night, I was helping Marcus, the foster family's younger son, with his math homework. We were breaking fractions into pizza slices and candy bars, and for some reason I actually enjoyed it. My foster parents watched from the doorway, and afterwards my foster mom said, "You know, you'd make a good teacher. Or a doctor. Someone who actually helps kids instead of hurting them." That thought stuck with me all night. For the first time, I imagined using everything Dad had taught me, but in reverse. Not to complete, to heal. And for the first time in my life, I could picture a future that wasn't just about surviving. 3 days later, the prosecutor came with an offer. If Dad pled guilty and gave up his parental rights, he'd only serve 5 years in prison. He refused before the sentence was even out of her mouth. His own lawyers looked like they wanted to melt into their chairs as he launched into the speech about how history would vindicate him. How completion therapy would one day be hailed as a breakthrough in preventative medicine. Then, in front of everyone, he tried to submit his handwritten journals as scientific research, until his attorney literally yanked them out of his hands. Month 4 was when everything exploded. Dad's mother showed up at my school, demanding to see her grandson. The principal calmly explained about the protection order, but she wasn't hearing it. She started screaming about grandmother's rights, until they had to lock down the entire building. From my classroom, I heard her voice echoing down the hall. My body just shut down. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in an ambulance, oxygen mask over my face, foster parents following behind in their car. They kept me in the hospital overnight for observation. Detective Moore immediately tacked on a protection order violation to my grandmother's growing list of charges. Meanwhile, my sister Sarah had been digging into Dr. Walker's past. She found Robert, one of his first experiments from 20 years ago. Robert drove up from Eugene with a folder of medical records showing permanent nerve damage from childhood completions that still caused him pain every single day. He even had photographs of the scars. His legs covered in precise, surgical lines where Walker had finished minor scrapes. His testimony was going to prove something huge. This wasn't just about my dad. This was a pattern. Walker had been perfecting this abuse for decades. In my next session with Dr. Torres, she handed me a box of crayons like I was 5. I didn't care. For an hour, I just drew. When she asked what it was, I realized I'd sketched a house with a garden and a fence, and no medical equipment anywhere in sight. My foster parents put it on the fridge next to Marcus' spelling test. Every time I passed it, something in my chest loosened. During the next custody hearing, Dad suddenly stood up and locked eyes with me. "I only wanted to perfect you," he said. Right before security shoved him back into his seat, I froze. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Judge Freeman immediately cited the outburst as proof Dad had no understanding of the harm he'd caused. In week 18, Mom underwent her psychological evaluation. The report came back. She was no danger to me. Just a woman carrying deep trauma from years of abuse. She admitted she needed therapy to work through the guilt of leaving me behind, but the evaluator noted her remorse was genuine and her commitment to healing was real. The recommendation was for supervised visits, building toward eventual custody. It was exciting and terrifying. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Dr. Walker's conviction. 15 counts. Fraud, assault, and practicing medicine without oversight. 15 years in prison with a shot at parole if he testified against Dad. He agreed instantly, and that's when we learned something that turned my stomach. Dad had been writing a book. Completion Therapy. A Parent's Guide. And he'd already been connecting with other parents online, training them in his methods. 47 phone calls. That's how many times my dad threatened my grandparents. 47. And somehow, between all those calls, he still found time for his completion sessions. How do you even convince one doctor that carving up a kid is legitimate medical treatment? He convinced 47. He built an entire fake medical history from scratch, invented diseases, made up syndromes, and sold it so well that even the neighbors believed it. And all the while, he was doing real, permanent damage. In court, the prosecutor held up printed emails. Emails where Dad bragged about his techniques, offering to mentor other parents in preventing their children's recurring injuries. That night, I asked my foster parents something I'd been holding in for months. Do kids who get hurt ever turn out normal? They didn't answer right away. Instead, they called their oldest son, David, adopted 15 years ago after surviving abuse that made my story feel almost small in comparison. David was now a high school biology teacher and a basketball coach. He told me normal was overrated. Being a survivor makes you stronger than normal, he said, showing me photos of his kids, his teaching awards. We know how to fight through anything, because we've already survived the worst. 5 months later, news vans swarmed the courthouse after Dr. Walker was convicted on all charges. They kept my name out of it, but Dad's face was plastered everywhere under headlines calling it the worst medical child abuse case in Oregon history. Letters started arriving at my foster home, from survivors all over the country. Cards, drawings, stories from strangers who knew exactly what it was like to have parents who hurt you. The social worker brought the mail in boxes, and we'd spend afternoons reading them together. Then my grandparents, Dad's parents, went on TV. They called him a misunderstood genius and said his theories would revolutionize medicine someday. They even hired a PR firm and launched a website called Understanding Completion Therapy, editing Dad's journals to sound almost scientific. Detective Moore called me into the FBI field office downtown. Agents were tracking every person who visited that site. They found 3 other families asking about the therapy and had to send emergency welfare checks to make sure no one else was getting hurt. The federal prosecutor told me they were also investigating my grandparents for promoting child abuse across state lines. That same month, I started group therapy with 5 other kids who'd been through medical abuse. I was the youngest by 3 years. The older ones talked about surgeries they didn't need, medications that made them sick, all while their parents collected sympathy. One girl, Sarah, had 37 unnecessary operations before someone finally believed her. We drew pictures of our scars and talked about how strange it felt when people treated injuries like accidents instead of analyzing them. The therapist kept making notes about how I could explain Dad's twisted theories in a way that helped the others make sense of their own trauma. And then, after 6 months of supervised visits, Mom, Karen, finally got approval for unsupervised ones. We met at the park with the duck pond. She brought bread just like we used to. We didn't talk about Dad or the case. We just fed the ducks and laughed when they fought over crumbs. Then I tripped on the playground and scraped my knee. Pretty badly. Karen knelt down, pulled a wet wipe from her purse, cleaned it, and stuck a regular Band-Aid over it. And we both just started crying. Crying because the Band-Aid stayed there. Because nobody talked about completing anything. Because for once, a scraped knee was just a scraped knee. We sat together on that bench, holding on to each other, and let ourselves cry over something that was finally, blessedly normal. 3 weeks later, Dad's criminal trial began. The prosecutor opened by warning the jury they were about to see proof of systematic torture. Torture disguised as medical treatment. She put my scars up on the screen, explaining how every single one came from Dad, completing a minor injury. Dad's lawyer argued he wasn't a monster, just a man with delusional disorder who genuinely believed he was helping me. But when the prosecutor rolled in that metal cabinet, the one full of surgical tools he'd used on me, I saw some of the jurors go pale. That same week, my foster parents filed the adoption papers. They told the court they wanted to keep me permanently if Karen couldn't get custody back. But they were willing to work with her. Open adoption, gradual visits, whatever it took to make it healthy for everyone. Karen actually looked relieved. She met them at a coffee shop, and they worked out a plan. I'd stay with my foster parents, but she'd get regular visits building up to weekends. Back in court, the prosecutor entered Dad's journals into evidence. A medical expert read his clinical language out loud and then translated it for the jury. Patient exhibited therapeutic vocalization meant I was screaming in pain. Achieved optimal depth penetration for permanent injury resolution meant he cut me down to the bone. Entry after entry. Torture documented like it was cutting-edge research. Outside of court, I started going to regular school again, under my real name, not the fake one from witness protection. The kids didn't know my case. At recess, I still flinched when the games got rough, but my teacher just watched, letting me figure it out for myself. When I fell in basketball and got a bloody nose, she handed me tissues and ice, like I was just another kid. When Dad took the stand, he spoke like he was giving a lecture to medical students. Charts, diagrams, injury patterns, healing cycles. He said modern medicine failed patients by not completing their wounds. When the prosecutor asked if he understood he'd hurt me, he said pain was necessary for proper healing, that I was his greatest success story. Proof the therapy worked, because I'd never re-injured the spots he'd completed. Then she asked how many other children he'd done this to. He said I was the only official subject, but admitted he'd started when I was 3 years old, not 6. He'd been completing my injuries for 6 years. Then he pulled out a flash drive, thousands of photos and videos of every session. Me at different ages, crying while he cut into me. The prosecutor entered all of it into evidence. The next day, Mom Karen took the stand. Her knuckles were white against the wooden rail. She told the jury it started small, him making me hold ice on bruises until my skin burned. Then medical tools on tiny scrapes. She described finding me unconscious in the bathroom after he'd completed a head bump with a textbook. Her voice broke when she told them about the day Dad threatened to complete my sister's broken finger if she called 911. She'd secretly documented my scars. Photos of me at 5 years old, surgical marks up my arms. She admitted leaving me behind was the hardest choice she'd ever made, but the courts had already branded her unstable. That night, my foster parents sat me down. They told me mental illness doesn't excuse hurting people, but it can explain how someone convinces themselves they're helping when they're actually causing harm. And even knowing that, I still felt sorry for him, even as my hands shook every time his face came on the news. The next morning, Dad's mother took the stand, and she shocked everyone. She admitted she'd taught him that pain builds character, making him kneel on rice for hours, burning his fingers with matches to teach consequences. The prosecutor pointed out that this explained how Dad's warped worldview started, but not how it escalated into systematic torture. Grandma actually seemed proud, until the prosecutor showed her my scars. After lunch, my medical team testified. They explained the nerve damage in my left leg that will never fully heal, how the repeated deepening of wounds had destroyed tissue that can't regenerate, how I'll live with chronic pain forever. The physical therapist demonstrated the limited range of motion in my shoulder from a completed dislocation. The psychiatrist said I'd need years of therapy and might never feel completely safe. The defense brought in their own expert, claiming completion therapy had theoretical merit based on ancient healing practices, that Dad just applied it wrong. The prosecutor shredded him. She proved there wasn't a single peer-reviewed study to support it, made him read from real medical texts that warned against deepening wounds. And when she revealed he'd been paid $50,000 for his testimony, the jury's faces hardened. He finally admitted he'd never treated a single patient with completion therapy, and had only even heard of it through Dr. Walker's online forums. 3 days later, I turned 10. My foster family threw me the first real birthday party I'd ever had, and they invited Karen too. There was chocolate cake, backyard games, and that strange, happy kind of quiet where the grown-ups are all trying to hide the fact they're wiping away tears. When I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for toys or video games. I wished to never be hurt again. Karen hugged me for the first time in years and whispered she was sorry for everything. It still blows my mind that Dad's mom sat in court and proudly told everyone she used to burn his fingers with matches when he was a kid. Like that somehow explained his methods. Did she even realize she was basically teaching him how to hurt me the same way? My foster mom took pictures of me actually smiling. She said it was the best gift she could have asked for. A week later, Detective Moore testified about what she'd found. Similar cases in 5 other states, all connected to Dr. Walker's completion therapy website. She showed the jury screenshots of forums where parents shared step-by-step guides for completing their kids' injuries, complete with supply lists. Then the FBI agent took the stand. They weren't just looking at individual cases anymore. This was a national torture ring disguised as alternative medicine. Over 200 members. And it all traced back to Dr. Walker's arrest. The biggest shock came when Dad's own father, my grandpa, took the stand against him. He admitted he'd known something was wrong for years, but was too scared of both his wife and his son to say anything. He looked right at me and apologized for not protecting me. And for the first time in the entire trial, Dad lost it. He stood up, red-faced, screaming about betrayal, until the bailiff shoved him back into his seat. The jury didn't take long. 3 hours later, they found him guilty on all 27 counts. Aggravated child abuse, practicing medicine without a license. The works. He sat there stone-faced, like he still believed he'd done nothing wrong, while the prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence on every single count. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time since the trial started. And when I woke up, I actually felt lighter. I told my foster parents. The judge said Dad can't hurt me anymore. And for the first time, I believed it. 3 weeks later, we were back in court for sentencing. I couldn't read my victim impact statement without shaking, so Mrs. Rodriguez read it for me. She told the judge about the years of terror, about the nightmares, about how I begged for protection. Karen spoke next. She talked about the guilt of leaving me behind, and she cried almost the entire time. Then Dad got his turn. In his orange jumpsuit, cuffed, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Future generations will understand my genius. You'll thank me someday." Judge Freeman cut him off, calling it one of the worst abuse cases he'd seen in 30 years. Then he sentenced Dad to 25 years to life, banned him from ever practicing medicine again, and gave Karen full custody with a plan for us to rebuild slowly. He also issued permanent restraining orders against Dad and his parents. As the bailiffs led him away, Dad muttered that my concussion was still incomplete. Security rushed him out before he could say more. 2 weeks later, Karen came for our first weekend visit. We sat in the living room with my foster parents, awkwardly figuring out how to be a family again. A month later, Dad's parents tried to get visitation rights. Judge Freeman shut it down immediately, warning them that any more attempts would mean criminal charges. Around that time, I started horseback riding therapy at a stable run by a woman who'd survived her own childhood trauma. She taught me that healing isn't a straight line. Some days are harder than others. 8 months after this all began, Detective Moore came by with big news. The FBI had shut down the entire completion therapy network. 12 parents arrested. She called me a hero. I told her I was just a kid who survived what I had to. Then we heard Dad had been attacked in prison. He survived, needed surgery, ironically. I didn't know how to feel about it. Karen arranged family therapy for me and my sister. We both admitted things we'd been holding in for years, her anger at Mom for leaving me, my anger at her for being the one who got saved. The therapist helped us see none of it was our fault. Eventually, I told the judge I wanted to stay with my foster family during the school year and visit Karen and my sister on breaks. He signed the papers right there. 3 months later, my scars started fading with a new treatment cream. I even rolled up my sleeves at school for the first time in years. Mrs. Rodriguez asked if I'd talk to younger kids about staying safe. I told them, if any adult hurts you and calls it medicine or for your own good, tell someone right away. That summer, we went camping, my foster family, Karen, my sister. We roasted hot dogs, made s'mores, and didn't talk about court or therapy. 6 months later, I got a letter saying Dr. Walker was in solitary after trying to complete another inmate's injury with a sharpened toothbrush. I threw it away. I hadn't thought about him in days, and that felt good. Detective Moore called again. This time, she told me about Ryan's Law, a new bill to catch parents who hide abuse behind fake medical treatment. She took me to the state capitol for the signing. I hated the attention, but she said my story could save lives. 1 year after escaping, I went to see Tom, the mail carrier who'd stepped between me and my dad that day. When he saw me, he dropped his mailbag and hugged me tight. He said I saved myself, but I told him he was the first person who believed me. Now, my scars are just proof I survived. And I know exactly what I want to be. A doctor who helps kids heal the right way. Because I already know what real pain feels like. And I'll spend my life making sure no one else has to learn that lesson the way I did.